Hi, this is Harley Jack back with another MATLAB video. And this is my second video in my basic series. In this video I'm going to focus on what's going on inside functions and writing functions, including drivers. So last video we looked at a function called min, and what it does is it takes in two inputs. Let's say we get 4 and 8, and this will evaluate to whichever is lesser, 4 or 8, which is 4. And then, due to how I write this statement, it takes the result of that, and that result is the newly assigned value of the variable named c, or let's call it t, I don't know. So now t is equal to 4. So what does min do? Well, it takes this 4, and it takes this 8, and it determines which one is the minimum. So another function you might have fun with is sine. So you might say that s is equal to the sine of pi over 2, which pi is just it's always equal to pi in MATLAB. You can't name a variable pi for that reason. But say you take the sine of pi over 2, that's 1. So what this does is there's a file that says what to do whenever you give a single value to the sine function, and then whenever you do sine of pi over 2, it takes in that pi over 2, it does something to it, and then it gets you your variable s, which is, or it gets you a value here, which is then assigned to the variable s. So this is very similar to sort of the idea of functions we have for mathematics. So here's what I get whenever I do an image search on functions. I have this nice notation here, which is very similar to the notation MATLAB uses. Because you have an output, or whatever you set it to, is equal to that name of the function, and the input. The function itself here would be named f, and actually this works in MATLAB just verbatim. MATLAB also has functions with multiple inputs, sort of this idea of this black box where you have an input, you don't know really what happens inside. There's an output where you just build what happens inside without the need for the user to know what happens inside. This is sort of the idea of a function as a machine with some input. It does something to the input, and then there's an output. Functions often have equations. They can have this idea of mappings, which this is not a function. This mapping is a function. This mapping is a function. X squared to be exact. They can be graphs, like these nice lambda functions. Okay. It looked like sync to me, but functions. They're what you think they're. But in MATLAB, you can actually have functions of multiple variables, and like min, and they can also have multiple outputs too. They can also have no inputs or no inputs, like rand, which has no inputs but just returns you a random number. And there are also some functions like disp, pi over 2. Now disp doesn't have an output. There's nothing you can set equal to disp and there be some valid output, like it's an error. There's some that have neither, but those are called drivers, and we tend to write a lot of those in 210. But of course, there's this whole idea of whatever you want to set the output equal to is equal to the function name, parentheses, list of inputs. So there you go. And it's like this in a lot of languages too. So going on to another idea, let's try doing a little silly function called add two nums, since in my last video where my computer crashed, I did mult two nums. So for this, we can use this button called New Script. It'll just open up an M file, which is, this is just a line, a place where you can put a bunch of lines of code to run at once, and you can put a function in an M file by just typing function, and then the name of your output arguments. We might say we have, say we want to do add two numbers. So we have just C is equal to add two nums of A and B. So what this first line tells us is that within our function, whatever the value of C is at the end, we're going to output this as its only output value. And then whatever the two values in parentheses are when this function is like called, like how I called disp right here, how I called rand right here, the two values within the parentheses will be automatically set to the names A and B within the function. It also doesn't matter if there are any A's or B's out here. This function will just run with its entirely new set of variable names. So like if there is something equal to A out here, that's not going to get touched or get changed to do what's in here. So you can put whatever you want into this function. It won't edit any A's or B's outside. Whatever's outside won't edit anything inside unless passed through this input or through this output. So it's sort of like the box where the only way that any information gets in or out is through the input hole or through the output hole. So if I just do the single line of code it needs to make this work, C is equal to A plus B. This will add A and B, which itself, the add plus is actually sort of a function. It doesn't look like other ones in MATLAB, but it technically is. And whatever comes out of that is then set to the variable C. Then I always close functions with an end. And what this end does is it says, okay, the stuff running inside the function ends here. I'm going to look at my list of output variable names. I'm going to ask what are those currently equal to here. So if I never set C inside, MATLAB would beep at me and get mad. And so there you go. So to save this function, I can just press the save button. And now I can go into my command line, and this function is just like min now. I can ask for it in the same way I ask for using min. So I can just do something like q is equal to add two nums, and maybe I want to add 4 and 9. There you go. It'll set q equal to 13. So that's sort of it with a basic function. One other sort of best practice that you should do whenever you write a function is always add a header. Now what a header is it just sort of says where's this function from and what does it do. So typically the first line of a header is just the function name, add two nums.m. So that's the name of the file. Or just, you could say add two nums. That also works. You want to credit yourself. So Jackie Terrell, Cam 210, Spring 17, RLA. And then you might stick in here maybe a quick description like adds the two inputs given and returns their sum, maybe, I don't know. And then you might say inputs A and B, which are just numbers, and outputs C, a number, the sum of A and B. this is pretty much all you need to do. And once you write more complicated code that's more centered on functions, this is going to become a whole lot more helpful, as sometimes you'll forget what all this stuff in the middle does, and just relying on this, you can actually do quite a lot. So, of course, what this percent sign is, this just says that everything past the percent sign on that line is a comment. So I can just do percent sign adds A and B to get C at the end of this line, and whenever it runs the code, it will not mess it up at all. I mean, it will just ignore this percent sign. Also, any like white space, MATLAB always ignores. Also, like an extra enter, MATLAB also ignores that. And I could add another space there, MATLAB will ignore that. And also, MATLAB ignores any comments. But like doing something like this, like adds A and B, that doesn't work, because now that C equals A plus B is a comment. Everything past a parenthesis on the line ends up, not doing anything. Okay, so that's a very, very simple function. Perhaps we can move on to something more complex, like let's call this function my stats. So function my stats. We might have maybe like the mean or mean, maybe the geometric mean, maybe the minimum, the maximum. I don't know. That's pretty much all I can think of. And that would be maybe 3 inputs, A, B, and C. Again, arbitrarily given. Also, it's not best practices to get like use function names. Like there's a function called mean in MATLAB, so you might call like my mean or something, my geo mean, my min, my max, or you could just call them A, B, or D, E, F, and G. I mean, that would work just as well. So if you do my mean, which would just be, the formula would just be the average of these three. So the sum of them, A plus B plus C over 3. And you might say arithmetic mean. Good if it's arithmetic or arithmetic, but and then my geo mean, which is, of course, the cube root of the product, A times B times C to the power of 1/3, which you probably wouldn't know, which is the geometric mean, which this is sort of like geometrically interpreted as if you had a prism with those sides, like a rectangular prism, this is the dimension of the cube that would have the same volume. So that's sort of cool. You can do my min is equal to, you can actually take the minimum using this funny little method, A comma B comma C. And this is actually creating a matrix, and min will also find the minimum value in a single matrix, right? So like you can do min of 1, 2, 3, and it'll just give you 1. And then you can copy this line for maximum. And you probably want to get, maximum, minimum. And, you've computed all your variables to your satisfaction, so you end the function. When it ends, MATLAB says, okay, what is my mean? What is my geo mean? What's my min? What is my max? And now I just save the file as my stats. And surely enough, I can go in the command window And if I just type my stats of, let's say, 4, 5, and 6, what happens? Oh, look. Wow. How did it only give me 5? The thing is, whenever you don't give MATLAB something to assign the answer to, it will give you only the first answer, which was the geometric or the arithmetic mean of the 3, which is 4 plus 5 plus 6 over 3, which is just 5. So if you do the more proper way, so you might just say the outputs are A, B, C, and D. Surely enough, you get your values. A, which is that, and that. So there you go. That's how you call a function. So this is a function of multiple variables. So there are 3 inputs, there are 4 outputs, and this is how you would use variable assignment with that. Okay, so let's say that we have this really cool function. Of course, add a header. I'm not going to for the sake of time in this video. And we wanted to demo it. So we might add something we call a driver. So what this driver is you can put 2 functions inside an IM file, and these functions inside the IM file, only the first one is visible to outsiders. So I'll sort of show you what I'm saying, but I'm just going to write a function. I'm going to call it my stats driver. And that's all I have to write, because it has no inputs or no outputs. If you want to be formal, you can just show that it definitely has no outputs like this. You can show it definitely has no inputs like this, but honestly that's really for your own sake. And I'm just going to add the little specification that this is a driver demonstrating my stats. So we can throw the my stats function, but if we just name it my stats here, MATLAB might get confused and ask about this my stats, as even if it wasn't there. So I'm just going to comment this out using Command R or Command T. I haven't done this in a long time. You can just press this little percent sign to comment. You can actually do my stats here of like 1, 2, 3, and sure enough, it will actually run. If you press this run button, what this does is it just runs your driver, and it just does the code that's in here. Surely enough, it did find my stats without this my stats existing. And that's because it works just like down here. I think it has priority for this one, but just to be safe, I'm going to rename this one my stats 2. Uncomment this line, and I'm using MATLAB R 2014a, which is like 2.5 years old. So my interface may look a little different than yours, but it shouldn't be too much different because I can still work with my R 2016b students. But so we can call my stats 2. It works down here. But if we call my stats 2 outside, it will never find it. So anything in here is private just to the driver function or other functions inside this driver. So say we want to come up with 3 random numbers, which you can use a command called randi, which will, so we get 3 random numbers, 1 through 6. Let's call them A is equal to randi of 6. And then we can also do B and C this way, perhaps. And surely enough, if we do display A, display B, display C, we can display those. That time it drew 6, 1, and 6. This time it drew 4, 1, and 2, so on. We can then do my stats on that, or my stats 2. So you can do something like D, E, F, G is equal to my stats2 of A, B, and C, because those are the names of our variables here. If we named these variables instead of A, B, and C, we named them Q, R, and S, or Mike, Bob, and Sam, that would work just as well. Actually, for the sake of fun, I will name them Mike. And you can replace them all by using Shift-Enter, Bob, and Sam. Works just as well. Okay, and this is just my stats2 displaying its output because I forgot a semicolon. Also, if I don't want to see old results runs, I can use the command all the way back from our first video, CLC. And that'll clear everything except what my stats prints. Okay, now for the good part. I'm going to display D, display E, display F, and display G. And there you go. There's your 3 inputs, and there are your 4 outputs. One other. So this is a driver. And it works because you can run it using the run button. It has, remember, no inputs, no outputs. This is very comparable to something that you should be able to do in about 2 weeks or so. Hopefully you could do it now with this whole tutorial. But of course, add your headers, have fun with that. There is another command that I think you might want to know, and it's called pause. And also, I might show you how to display text. So first, I'm going to display text. And I'm going to say, are you ready for the cool results? And notice it's within single quotes. Only single quotes work in MATLAB. Double quotes do not work in MATLAB. So you have to use single quotes. And it would print, are you ready for the cool results? And you might add, like disp arithmetic mean. And it'll do that. Disp geometric mean. And you might even add a little colon there. Just to say, it's what's on the next line. I'd say disp your, the third one I think is minimum. And you might say disp maximum. And you might say disp the 3 inputs. And when you run it, you might get something even nicer, like this, where it says the 3 inputs, 1, 2, and 1. And it tells you all your means. You might even say, instead of just having the results display immediately, you might be doing these in your head, like I did in high school. And, if you're doing it in your head, you might add this thing called pause. Now pause just waits for you to press enter or something to continue. So you can say press enter to continue. And then when you press enter, surely enough, that'll go. And I think it works for any key too. I guess you can say any key. And it'll give you your cool results. So this is sort of a driver. Notice it's mostly built to drive other functions. It just sets up variables. It runs your core piece of code that you're trying to show off, which is my stats2, which doesn't really seem that impressive by itself. And then it normally prints something or makes a pretty graph, something like that. So this is about similar in scope to a project in this course. Okay, as far as the basics of functions, I think that that's about it. I also got a little bit into strings, but in the next video I'm going to look at some basic built-in functions, and I'll let you, learn about those. Okay, that's it for this video.